operating a computerized radar and weapon system, far beyond the simple point-and-fire guns of 1941.
I believe that Ward's actions on that day in Pearl Harbor were absolutely amazing. Given today's technologies and all the things that we used to fight these submarines, we would fail without any kind of electronics, especially people getting woken out of their sleep and having to react rather quickly. The Ward was able to accomplish this with 2 shots, knocking out an enemy submarine, probably something where they was very unexpected.
Clearly, the Ward's gunners did something extraordinary. But did their shot find its target? Ultimate proof would elude discovery for 60 years. For over a decade, marine researchers from the University of Hawaii and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration have been combing the area outside of Pearl Harbor for some sign of this elusive sub.
There's more history under the waves than there are in all the museums of the world. There's just thousands and thousands of shipwrecks throughout all our waters, our rivers, everywhere. These are missing links to our past. They connect us with our maritime history, and in this case, with our naval history.
Terry Kirby, Director of Operations for the University of Hawaii's Undersea Research Lab, has been leading the search for the sub for over 10 years.
Well, we've been looking for it since 1991. That's when we knew that it was out there and that the Park Service and other groups had been looking for it.
In August of 2002, the search finally paid off. Peering out of their portholes, they saw a long, cigar-shaped object with dual propellers at one end. This was the first look at the midget sub in over 60 years.
The first clue that it was the one the Ward sank was the fact that both torpedoes were still in the torpedo tubes. But when we maneuvered around on the starboard side of the sub and we saw the shot hole in the conning tower where the crew of the Ward said that they hit it, then it was unmistakable. And just to see that and realize that it was the one the Ward sank, it was the first action of the Pacific War, was amazing.
With the discovery of this wreck, the book seemed to have been closed on the story of the midget subs.
In the years following the attack, 4 of the 5 midget submarines were accounted for. There was the one sunk by the Ward. There was the one sunk by the USS Monaghan as it entered Pearl Harbor. Sakamaki's midget submarine was captured and became a war bond trophy. And in 1960, another submarine was found in Kehi Lagoon and raised, with the torpedoes still intact.
But there is still one midget sub yet to be accounted for, the so-called 5th sub.
The 5th midget submarine is still missing, and it's still a mystery what happened to it.
Some believe that this captured Japanese photo is the key to this mystery.
And there was an object in the middle of the harbor. Now, I'd always thought it was some sort of debris, but if you looked at the wakes that come out of it, it appears to be the sail of a midget submarine.
Could history still be wrong about what happened at Pearl Harbor? For example, we know that history records the attack as a surprise. History is wrong.
This was an echo I had never seen the likes of before. It was the largest thing I'd ever seen on the scope. It was moving. It had to be aircraft.
History says that radar gave the United States an hour warning, a warning that was ignored. Again, history is wrong.
There was no way for the information center to call the airfields to alert them.
It is one of the enduring legends of World War II, and it took place here, in this lush Hawaiian paradise. A lone Army radar station detects the approaching Japanese aerial armada. An urgent call is placed and ignored. A turning point in history is reached the last chance the United States had to save the Pacific Fleet. But as with so many legends surrounding the attack on Pearl Harbor, this story is wrong. These men should know. This is their story. Early on the morning of December 7th, two Army privates, Joe Lockhart and George Elliott, were manning the Army's new radar installation on Oahu's North Shore. At the same time the midget subs were creeping into the harbor, the Japanese aerial armada was approaching. Just after 7 a.m., Lockhart and Elliott picked up a huge contact.
It was an enormous amount of aircraft. It moved at a speed which we knew to be aircraft. It couldn't be a ship. It was moving too fast. So we called the switchboard operator at the information center on our administration line.
First Lieutenant Kermit Tyler was the officer on duty at the information center. On his way to work that morning, he noticed that the local radio station was still on the air.
And I happened to have the radio on, and I heard Hawaiian music. Well, this told me that some B-17s were coming in because a bomber pilot friend of mine who had flown B-17s over there said the only time they operate the local radar station after midnight is when the B-17 flight is coming in.
B-17s flying in from the mainland would use these broadcasts to home in on their Hawaiian destination. So when 2 hours later, Kermit Tyler got the historic call from Joe Lockhart's radar station, he made a logical assumption.
He said that he had the largest plot he'd ever seen on his radar scope. It was easy for me to put two and two together and decide that this was definitely the B-17. I told him, don't worry about it, it's okay.
Tyler's decision has gone down as one of the turning points of modern history. He has lived the rest of his life in that shadow. But is Kermit Tyler really to blame for what happened? Would anything have turned out differently had he instantly realized the magnitude of the approaching danger? The answer is no.
There was no way for the information center to call the airfields to alert them. None of that had been put in place. There was no red phone to pick up and say, look, we've got enemy planes coming in, scramble your aircraft. That could never happen in December of 1941.
But even if a warning system was in place, would it have done any good?
An hour's notice could have made a difference, but the Japanese still had overwhelming numerical advantage.
Would an hour's advance warning have allowed the American defenders to get enough planes in the air to repel the attack? At the time, there were 84 airworthy American fighters on hand, facing off against 183 Japanese planes, including 43 Zero fighters. The odds were not in America's favor, and worse, many of her fighters were not ready to fly.
On the morning of December 7th, the fighter aircraft preparedness was very low. In fact, they were parked wingtip to wingtip at Wheeler Field, and the bombers at Hickam Field were also wingtip to wingtip. The biggest fear had been sabotage from local Japanese. In order to protect them, they brought them closest to the hangars and put guards around them. It was a fatal error because once the Japanese fighters and dive bombers show up, they simply start one plane on fire and it'll go right down the line.
With the American fighters helpless on the ground, the ships in Pearl Harbor were defenseless against the Japanese bombs. And for the fighters that did get airborne, the Japanese had another surprise waiting.
On the morning of December 7th, the Japanese Navy unleashed one of the deadliest fighters of the Pacific War, the famed A6M2 Type 21 Zero fighter.
The Zero was a superb fighter plane. The Americans didn't have anything either in the Army or the Navy that could deal with it effectively at that time.
The Zero was the stealth fighter of its day. The Japanese had gone to great lengths to keep it a secret. Claire Chennault, leader of a group of volunteer airmen called the Flying Tigers, had been fighting the Japanese and their Zeros in China the year before December 7th. He was astonished by the Zero's capabilities. The War Department quickly responded. Bunk. Such an airplane is an aerodynamic impossibility.